And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm David Kramer, meteorologist with the National Weather Service for Alaska weather and our aviation segment for today. Starting off, we'll look at our flying weather on Friday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we have widespread MVFR conditions with some pockets of IFR by the eastern Aleutians and out by the central Aleutians. Up over mainland Alaska, VFR conditions for much of the southern areas. Nice flying conditions expected Friday morning. But as we get farther to the north, with some of those systems coming in, we are expecting to see some lower conditions, primarily MVFR, but also some areas of IFR, especially in some of the snow. Down in southeast Alaska, we're looking at IFR conditions up along the coastal mountains, and then MVFR conditions as we get closer towards the Gulf. Friday afternoon clearing up to be primarily MVFR throughout all areas of the Panhandle until we get farther north, a little bit north of Sitka and through the Yakutat area, all expecting to be VFR. VFR for much of mainland Alaska remaining through Friday afternoon, but still some areas of MVFR and IFR up along the Brooks Range and farther north. Down the west coast, some MVFR conditions moving into areas of the Seward Peninsula and down in the Norton Sound area. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian, still primarily MVFR conditions with remaining pockets of IFR out by the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. As we move into Saturday morning, widespread MVFR through the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, still in areas around Norton Sound and up along the Arctic coast in the Brooks Range north. Some areas of IFR also going to be in the Brooks Range. Much of the interior and south central expecting to continue to be nice flying weather on Saturday morning. Then we are going to see some MVFR conditions in the central and southern portions of the Panhandle. As we move into Saturday afternoon, clearing up in the Panhandle area, all VFR conditions expected. Some lingering MVFR out over the Gulf of Alaska, however, but out over mainland Alaska, south central and the interior all expected to be VFR, and still seeing some areas of MVFR extending up through the Arctic coastline with areas of IFR out farther to the east. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, continuing to see widespread MVFR conditions on Saturday afternoon. For our passes, starting up north in the Brooks Range, Anaktuvik should be IFR throughout the day on Friday, as well as Adigan. As we saw in the charts, pretty nice weather down south, so all the Alaska Range expecting to be VFR, like Clark and Merrill, both VFR, Rainy expected to be VFR, as well as windy, Isabel, Ham and Tasta, all expected to be nice flying conditions for Friday. Tanita expected to be VFR conditions as well as at Portage, but down in Chilkoot and White going to start off IFR and then improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon. For our freezing levels, surface freezing line is still going to stay north of much of the Panhandle area, then extend through southern portions of South Central, down on the coastline of Southwest Alaska, and then moving up towards the St. Lawrence Island area. Some areas of cold air trying to extend down over the central Aleutians with some warmer air off to the west by the western Aleutian Islands, and extending some of that cold air down over the Panhandle as well, with freezing levels getting down to as low as 2,000 feet for those central portions of the Panhandle. For our icing, areas of icing by the Alaska Peninsula through Kodiak Island, above 5,000 feet expected there. Up in the interior, we're expecting to see some lighter icing below 6,000 feet, and then up along the Arctic coastline below 5,000 feet. For our jet stream, one branch of the jet coming in at 75 knots out of a northwesterly direction through the Seward Peninsula area, and then out by south central Alaska out of a more westerly direction, 95 up to as high as 105 knots. But the strongest portion of the jet is going to be coming around some ridging out over the western Bering Sea, as high as 125 knots coming into the northern Bering, and then down by the Aleutians, around 95 knots expected. As we drop down to 9,000 feet, we're going to see that westerly flow out over the western portions of the Bering up to 35 knots. Out over the Aleutian Islands, more of a easterly component up to as high as 40 knots there. Out over the mainland part of the state, we're going to have north to northwest flow over all of the mainland. Some areas up to around 30 knots through the Barren Islands area. Strongest winds, however, are going to be the northeastern portions of the mainland up to as high as 50 knots there. Out over the Panhandle area, we're going to see more westerly flow up to as high as 40 knots, strongest in the more northern locations of the Panhandle. Down to 3,000 feet, clearing up quite a bit in the Panhandle, dropping down to some much lighter winds, much lighter for south central Alaska as well. Still seeing some northerly or northwest winds up along the Arctic coastline as high as 40 knots, highest as we get closer to the Beaufort Sea, and the interior around 25 knots out of that northwest direction. Then out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, we have easterly winds in the southern Bering around 40 knots, moving around a low pressure system farther to the south. Then way out over the far western Bering Sea, some southwesterly winds around 25 knots there. Taking us to our turbulence, some of those stronger winds out over the Aleutian is going to bring some turbulence into the islands below 3,000 feet. And some of the stronger winds up in the interior areas, eastern interior below 7,000 feet. That's going to be true for the northeastern Brooks Range as well. I'm David Kramer. Thanks for watching.